Good evening, everyone. Here we are live for a special show. Name is Chuck Daughtrey. I am the owner of coppercoins.com. I'm the attributor for the website, and I'm also the spokesperson and, I guess, narrator of the videos. And here we are this evening with a special coin that I found earlier today in a roll reveal. This coin belongs to Joe McBride, and we found it during the roll reveal for a 1945 Lincoln cent roll. And it appears that this concave area on Lincoln's forehead here appears to be a struck through letter. It's a struck through a dropped letter, it appears. And given that it appears that way, I started doing a little bit of research on these. They run for anywhere between $100 or $300 in decent condition. This one is in decent condition. So if it turns out that this is actually a dropped letter struck through, it's going to turn out to be a huge boon, big giant win on the part of Joe McBride, who happens to be here. Congrats on your pull, Joe. This is a beautiful coin. Now, I've taken the liberty of getting a few things set up in advance because it's really kind of boring and there's not really anything to show you other than I'm on Photoshop here, and I have taken the liberty of creating images of the same magnification of different areas on the coin where I think this duplication could possibly have happened. We have three different letters, E, on the coin that I think could be the case or the cause of this duplication. And I believe it's an E because there is another little part coming out right here, and it appears as though our plug that fell out of the die hole was broken. And so the plug that fell out and was struck into this coin is not a complete letter. It is a partial letter. So given what I believe here is a partial letter, then I can assume that this is going to be, because we're going to be reading this right side up and forward. It's just a mirror image of what would be in the die. And a mirror image of a die would be a forward incuse rather than a backwards incuse. So the chances that this are a dropped letter are relatively high. I have a relative high amount of confidence in this. So let's get started with the process of trying to find out where this plug that got struck into this coin came from. The first thought I had was that it could be the E of we. And I thought, well, okay, I should use that at least as a possibility. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to photograph this, and photograph this, and I'm going to group them all together in Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the group because I don't want to ruin my first set of images, the only set I have. I would rather ruin something. If I'm going to ruin anything, it's going to be a copy of the original. So that's all I did, was made a copy, and I can work from the copy. I still have my original images here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I up the contrast on this a lot so that I can see it much more clearly when it's not opaque. Understand that you're probably not going to pick up on everything I'm doing here all at once, but I'm going to change the levels of this to change its contrast significantly so I can see it better when it's not as opaque as it is now. And then I'm going to draw the opacity down to about 50%, somewhere in the 50% area. Now you can see my original image down below this image now. And so what I'm going to do at this point is make it so that I can move this image however I need to move it to get it to fit in that hole. The one thing that I want to make absolutely certain and sure that I do not do is actually change the size of this image, because the sizes of the two images should match perfectly with one another. So as I move this around to get it into a place that makes it look a little more like it's going to match where the E of we would match up with that perfectly, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter when I think I've got it in the right place. I'm going to bring its opacity back up to 100%. Now what I can do is actually turn the toggle switch for viewing this layer on and off, and we can compare what we see. And that's going to tell us, with it in that spot and at that size, it's going to tell us what we should probably expect to see. And to me, it doesn't fit. And the reason I say it doesn't fit is because we're missing the entire corner of the letter up here. This is very wide, and this appears to drop back out like you're coming back out for a letter here, rather than where the E actually does come out, which is way down here. So this is, in a way, it's kind of telling me that I don't believe that this E is the culprit here. And I think you probably agree after I flip the switch a few more times and let you see the two overlaid directly onto one another. And the area that I used for that overlay is, pick a better color to use for something bright. We'll use a bright green. Neon green, how about that? And I'm going to create a new layer up here. And I'm going to draw in this layer, but I'm going to draw a line that matches where I need my opacity drawn up on this. Let me go ahead and zoom in some so I can see this a little more clearly. And I'm going to draw a line pretty much where I expect any lines to be on my area of the forehead. Basically just trace around the E, just like that. Now when I make this layer invisible, you can see where it was, and so we can do a little better job trying to match up if we're just using a frame, just a wire frame. And it looks like we have a mismatch right in this area. We have a mismatch with where that stem goes. Everywhere else it looks pretty good because I can see, okay, yeah, there might be a corner up here that you can actually see straight down. Corner comes out, and you don't necessarily have to end this area here. These could have broken off because we're talking about a piece of gunk. We're talking about a piece of shavings, metals, dirt, and other stuff. It's not going to be as strong as the metal of a coin or a metal of a die. And so when it gets caught up in there, it's going to break pretty easily. It's going to be very fragile. So to take where we expect to see the edges and overlay that gives us a better idea that we probably are not speaking of the same area here, because this little spot right here comes out at a different angle from this spot. You can't change angles. The angles have to be exactly the same. So there is some small chance that with some damage or flattening, this could possibly be out of the E of we. But let's go on and look at the others and see where we are with those. Here's the E in Liberty. Let me zoom back out. Zoom out a little bit more. And let's do the same thing with this layer. So I'm going to over contrast it a little bit so that I can see exactly where my edges are when it's not so bright. I'm actually going to take some color out of it too, because it has a little bit too much color in it that way. And then I'm going to knock its opacity down again. And now I can, let me bring it down a little bit farther. There we go. And now I can crank it around so it is perfectly lined up with what we're looking at as the copy. Move it around a little bit so I can get my bearings and figure out exactly where I am. And that's about as close as I'm going to get this. It becomes readily apparent pretty quickly after having done the exercise we just did that this is not going to even come close to a match. It's not the right shape, not the right size. It just doesn't match. Now, if we also look at the B, my wife suggested this could be a partial B. If we look at the B, we can actually train this image down. Let's bring its opacity back down so we can see what we're doing, and train this back down to here and put the B in that spot. And then bring the opacity back up. And then once again, we can see that the B is just the wrong thickness. It's the wrong area. It has the wrong curves. Nothing is right for this to be that section of that B. So again, probably not it. So what else do we have? Well, there's actually 3 small E's. I mean, there's 2 large E's on the Lincoln cent, but there's 3 small E's, the third one being this, the E of E Pluribus Unum. Could it be the R of liberty? I don't think so. In looking at the R, or the section where the R is, I can bring it up to about the area. Let me knock the opacity down. And you can see right there already that we're just not going to come up with anything close to a match, because the stem of the R is actually further down than the stem of the E, and makes it even less of a good match. Let me bring up the opacity here. See how far right in this area right here, you've got this stick coming out right here that does not exist at all on the R. So definitely not it. There is some chance that it could possibly be the P of Pluribus, but I don't think so, because what we're looking at right here appears to be a very clean, round area and a relatively clean looking cut right there. Not sure what that indicates, but what it indicates to me is that this could have been a letter that had a protrusion here, could be something that had a protrusion here that broke off. So that's kind of what it looks like to me. So let's check the E of E Pluribus Unum and see if we can make this do the same thing that we made those other layers do. And let me knock its opacity down so I can see through it. And now let me match this up as best I can. Right about there, I guess. Now let's bring the opacity back up. And the one thing that grabs my attention here is this area right here where your E definitely makes a curve like this. Now if you look at that and then you look inside here, it definitely makes a curve. Your crosslet up here is a little smaller on the E, and it's more triangular in shape than it is actually a squared off stick. So again, I'm kind of thinking that it may be a little difficult to make this match. There is some chance that the dropped letter could have gotten squished when the die was going down on it to make the letter look a little thicker than before. Yes, that is possible. It's not unlikely that that could happen. But most of the time in struck through dropped letters, your dropped piece is going to retain the shape and size that the original letter did, because generally it doesn't last for more than a couple of strikes, and your piece that fell out of the die is falling out because it's rigid and it's ready to be on its own, you might say. It's not liquefiable as easily. So let's take a better look at this again. So we kind of have a reason now why we don't have well, let's just draw on this. You remember this little guy? I'm going to erase all of this. Nope, you can't erase it with no opacity. There we go. I'm going to erase all of this and redraw on it using my little drawing tool. And let's zoom in and get all the minute little details just right. So we're going to start here. We're going to go up here and we're going to curve around. None of you realize that this letter was so curved as it is until you see it redrawn, tracing directly over where the letter had been. Don't try this at home. I've been doing this for years. Just to let you know. You're not going to expect to come out with results like this right away. So now let's make this layer transparent. We're off a little bit at angle. You can see that now. Now that I erase the other, we're off by angle. So let's change the angle of these two together. And then go back to look at this again. Okay, we still need to change the angle more. We're a little bit closer, but I think we're a little low now. So now I need to move it actually down and to the right. Now let's see if we've done it. A little closer, much closer. Other than the shape of that piece in the center, I think we have a very close match to the E of E Pluribus Unum. You can see that now if you just look at that and this. So I think you guys can make your own comments and your own judgment based on this, and I am perfectly fine if you disagree with me, but I do believe this is a partial E from the E Pluribus Unum part of the coin that has collected in the reverse die, then fallen out of the reverse die, transferred to the obverse side of a die or the coin, laying on the coin when this coin was struck. That makes this, if this is truly what it is, and it can be certified as such, it makes it very rare, because it's very uncommon for a dropped letter from the reverse to end up on the obverse of the coin. They're more common to happen from the obverse to obverse or reverse to reverse. But this is actually a flip from the reverse to the obverse. And so if this is indeed that letter right there, moved into proper position so that it works out perfect. You saw me do this live. I wasn't tracing this shape. I was tracing the E. So given that I was tracing the E, we're a little more, just a little more, convinced that this is an E. Now, where are our problems? Where are we going to be asking questions? Okay, well, I'm going to knock this down in opacity so we can barely see the green. And you've got this little spot right here where it looks like you have a very nice curve and then it straightens out. You definitely do not have that on the E of the Pluribus Unum. Your other thing, this is much bigger and thicker and sticks out a lot further here than your E on the E Pluribus Unum, which has almost a triangular shaped center bar. The other thing, where's this? It's almost completely gone. Your lower bar of the E is almost completely gone down here. So this has kind of really a different shape. But the convincing parts are the fact that this is not square, it's rounded, that this is rounded, and this down here is rounded, and that part is very obvious, both on the actual letter on the coin and in this impression made by some piece of something. I'm also noticing that if I flicker this on and off, you can see the bottom part of the central bar of the E right here. Watch this as it flickers on and off. Can you see that dark line there? So we could have something that was smudged or smeared in some way as it was being minted into the coin. Where is the piece that was minted into this coin? Well, it fell out. After the coin was minted, it dislodged and came off. But this is what I'm seeing as very likely, or in my estimation, is likely to be this letter on the coin, mashed and dropped on the obverse to be minted into the forehead of Mr. Lincoln. The height of the letter is about right. The shape of the letter is close enough to say, okay, it's worth considering. So I hope that we find, through a submission perhaps, that this is actually the E of E Pluribus Unum on the obverse of the coin. Now, the only other spot that it could possibly be, that I've seen a few other people here. Let me erase this. Bring this opacity up to 100%. Then grab my eraser, pop it off, and then we're going to do this on the fly. I am going to drop the opacity of this layer, and I'm going to move this layer to where the P is in the right place. This takes some practice to get right, but I think I'm close with that. The edge of the photo is not going to be as good as if it were centered, but we're going to get an idea this way anyhow. We're definitely missing some stuff here. First of all, this needs to be turned a little bit more. It's not at the right angle. And let me draw its opacity down so I can move this around now. I'm using this area right here and this area right here as my key indicators as to whether I'm in the right spot. So I move it around until I can see those in the underlying photo, and then I move this into place, kind of backing out, going back and forth, making sure I've got it set right. And I think it's set right now, so I'm going to bring its opacity back up. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and trace the outline of the important areas of this letter. Just like that. Let's go ahead and get the edges of where the hole is. Now, if we had a partial P and say we did not have, I'm going to erase part of this just so as to not confuse us. But if I erase this part of it, okay, and that's all we've got left, does it match? It doesn't look like it. You see how the P turns out to be just a wee bit thinner? Right in here, it's a wee bit thinner. And your entire bar area is moved down a little more. Now, if we do move it up a little bit, to say maybe, okay, perhaps he got it set wrong. So let's just set it a little bit higher. What that's going to do is it's going to take my lines and move them off a little bit further. Let's match this and see what happens at the top. So if I turn this back on and we go this way with it, you'll see that this angle here is closer to being matched. This angle is close to being matched. We've got a pretty decent match up here, but this area here is horrible. Completely the wrong direction. So I don't think this is a P. I don't think it's a partial P. It could be, but I don't think it is. We could play this game with the other letters, but I don't think any of them are going to match up. And the problem with it is right now I don't have a photo of the R of Pluribus, but with the Pluribus, let me see if I can. I was having trouble getting this to work for me earlier. This is the actual coin, but my my camera is totally frozen in live mode. I can't use it at all to show you anything. So this won't do me any good. I see when I start to turn it off, then it shows. So with no light, I actually have a little bit of live without light, but when I turn my light on, it freaks out. Okay, so we're asking about the R of Pluribus and see if maybe that could possibly be what we're after. I can't really do anything about it right now because I totally cannot control my microscope when I'm live. I have zero control over it right now. I would have to end the stream to be able to deal with my microscope and then come back. And we can't do that. The shape and size of the R is a little different from the P, obviously. And this little angle right here is one of the key indicators that we were after, which does not exist on this letter. You also have a little bit more of what appears to be a bar going across the bottom than a bar sticking out of the bottom right corner. So we're getting further away from the actual shape of the letter that we're after if we go into an R. And so that's our primary problem there, is that we don't have anything here at all to indicate this is an R. And this shape is wrong. This area is wrong for this to be the R. So the only point that we really have a real problem with right now is this, for it being a P. And so I need to see if I actually traced it properly by doing this. I've actually got it at a shallower angle than it actually is, which is opposite the direction we would like for it to move in to make proof. Because it's actually more of a steeper angle coming up in here rather than going this way like we need it to. I'm looking at the trying to watch the chat too to make sure I'm answering all the questions and everything. Hey Jessica. It could have something to do with the angle of the piece of stuff that was sitting on there. The thickness of that piece of stuff could also have to do with that. There's a lot of things that could slightly change the shape of the letter. But the best candidate so far that I have seen for this being what I believe it is right here. And I'll do it all over again just to show that wasn't a fluke. I'm going to erase this completely. I'm going to take the opacity of this layer down. Now I'm going to move it so that the E is in place. Turn it to the proper angle, or what I believe is the proper angle. And then bring this up so that I have it in the right spot. I'm looking for my inside curl right there. I think that's right. Let me flip it on and off, see if I come close. Okay, best thing to do now, go ahead and draw around the edge of my letter. There, about as close as I'm going to get for a real quick job. There we go. Now let me see if I'm in the right spot. Yeah, pretty close. We have a different angle and length to this part here that I cannot answer for right now. But the rest of the shape seems to be relatively close. The angle is off a bit. There we go. Now the position is off just a little, but you can see what I'm talking about. I think we're pretty close with an E from E Pluribus unum. So that's really what this looks like to me, and that's what I would assume is the deal with this coin until otherwise argued. But that's what we have.